I'm not sure if we're streaming. It's possible that we are.
When you look at them in trying to enrich themselves, I mean, you're familiar with the work that the Oversight Committee has done over the last year, right?
I think we've done.
I have read some reports of it.
I mean, 20 phone calls that were made to his son that he denied in 2019, 20 shell companies that were created, over $20 million. I mean, doesn't it appear there's a pattern here that where I come from, they almost call it money grubbing?
Lawyer, I'm not a tech guy.
Congressman, what I'm here to testify about today is the work that I conducted in this investigation and in this report.
So I want to thank you for the work that you did as far as you could, but unfortunately, you are part of the Praetorian Guard that guards the swamp out here in Washington, D.C., protecting the elites. And Joe Biden is part of that company of the elites. And you see it in the things that the Department of Justice has not acted on, Mr. Chairman. I mean, you look at the president's son, who does not have to answer for lying on his Form 4473 in regards to throwing away a weapon. You see it where the Department of Justice fends off the IRS when the whistleblowers come with this information. Now we see it once again, where a president believes he is above the law, and there is no doubt that this president does believe he's above the law. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Herr, welcome. I also concur, and let me echo what's already been said by my colleagues, that your personal story of being an immigrant, your family immigrants to this country, the way you've contributed to the greatness of this country shows why America is great. The great immigrant story. Thank you for being here, sir. First question to you is, you're a Republican?
I am, sir.
Does that stop you from a thorough and fair investigation?
I certainly hope not, and I know not.
This story is really proof of the old saying that the cover-up is worse than the crime. President Trump and President Biden handled their classified materials differently, wouldn't you say?
My report includes an assessment of the alleged facts in the pending indictment of former President Trump and a comparison to the facts that we found in this case. But
clearly the handling of these documents was night and day, correct?
Congressman, do you have a specific aspect of the handling of the documents that you have in mind?
Well, you know, President Trump intentionally took classified materials and obstructed justice to ensure that those materials wouldn't be taken from him, and he refused to work with law enforcement. Is that correct?
My report reflects no findings of obstructive conduct on the part of...
Let me ask you another question. President Trump has been indicted in the U.S. District Court of Southern Florida on 40 counts related to his possession of classified documents. Is that correct?
I don't know the exact number of counts, but I know that an indictment is pending in that district.
Mr. Herr, you even wrote that after being given a number of chances to return classified documents and avoid prosecution, President Trump allegedly did oppose. And according to the indictment, he not only refused to return those documents over for many months, but he also obstructed justice by enlisting others to destroy evidence and lie about them. Compare and contrasting to President Trump turned classified documents over to the National Archives and the Department of Justice, and he consented to searching his home and other locations. Wouldn't you say that's night and day when it comes to cooperation with law enforcement?
Congressman, the report does include an analysis and a comparison of the facts that are alleged with respect to former President Trump, and does detail steps of cooperation that the President and his team took with respect to my investigation.
I would say, President Biden, you had his full cooperation in this investigation.
The report includes cooperative steps that the President took.
Would this be a factor in your decision to prosecute?
It was a factor, and I explained it as such in the report, Congressman.
And you stated that the recommendation not to prosecute had nothing to do with the Department of Justice policy not to indict the sitting president. Is that correct?
Well, the report says that even if it were not current Department of Justice policy that a sitting president may not be indicted on federal crimes, I would reach the same conclusion that criminal charges are not warranted.
Mr. Herr, have you set new precedent here today?
To the extent that the Department of Justice makes enforcement decisions or non-enforcement decisions in particular cases, those are precedents. Those are events that future prosecutors do look to in an endeavor to make sure that federal law is applied consistently over time.
Mr. Herr, I'd say, based on your education and your career experience, you're a very, very competent prosecutor, a very, very well-prepared attorney. I'm going to ask you one more time. Does the fact that you're a Republican, does that stop you from a thorough and fair investigation?
No, partisan politics had nothing to do with the work that I did or the report that I wrote or the decision that I reached.
Thank you very much for being here. And Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Attorney Herr, Webster's dictionary defines senile as exhibiting a decline of cognitive ability, such as memory associated with old age. Mr. Herr, based on your report, did you find that the president was senile?
I did not. That conclusion does not appear in my report, Congressman.
You felt, though, that the president's memory or lack thereof was a critical reason to decline prosecution. The reason I'm asking this is whether you believe the president would be fit to stand trial, or do you think his lawyers would argue his incompetence to stand trial due to his
Subscribe, by the
state
way.
of mind?
Newer channel,
Also,
trying to grow to 1,000.
you know, was he in a place to actually be questioned?
Congressman, my report, to the extent that it addresses the president's memory gaps that we identified and the evidence that we obtained during our investigation, they are addressed in the context of determining how the jury would perceive, receive, and consider evidence relating to whether or not the president had willful intent when it came to retaining or disclosing national defense information.
Very
So,
good. I'd like to
that's
focus my
interesting.
questioning on Chapter 14 of your report.
I wonder
the classified
when
documents
he's
found at the
considering
Penn
his
Biden
intent.
Center.
His current
You stated in your
intent or
report
the
that the
intent
documents found at the Penn
initially
Biden Center were the
when he
most highly
brought the
classified,
documents?
sensitive,
They may
and
have already addressed this. I
compartmentalized
watched,
materials
sorry.
recovered during your
Answer
investigation. Is
that.
that correct?
That is correct.
Many of the documents came from Mr. Biden's West Wing office. That's also correct, isn't it?
I believe that is reflected in the report.
Did you ask if he had packed the boxes himself?
I believe that was one of the questions that we asked, and that is reflected in the transcript now available to the committee.
I think it's important. How would you characterize the packing of these boxes? Was it slow and meticulous, or were they packed in haste without much scrutiny at all?
I don't recall off the top of my head exactly how we characterize it, but I think the gist of the evidence is that the manner in which files were packed up and moved out at the end of the Obama administration was in something of a rushed manner.
Very good.
And it's
According to your
always
report,
in
the
a
boxes
rushed
were moved
manner is
between
the
multiple
point. At the end
offices,
of every
between Mr.
administration,
Biden
it's like, all right,
departing his
everybody's
West Wing
gotta
office in
pack
January
up
of
and go.
17 and his arrival at the Penn Biden
Although,
Center's permanent offices
eight-year
in October of
presidents have the
17.
benefit of
Were any of
knowing
these
they're on the way
offices
out,
authorized to
where
store
one-term
classified
president
information?
Like
No.
President Trump
When the
did not
boxes
have
finally
that
arrived at the
benefit.
Penn Biden
So
Center's
this
permanent
is-
offices,
this is a little bit of a rigged,
how were they stored?
Bogus.
I believe when the
charges
materials were
got
recovered,
against them, where
some of them
Biden
were
is,
stored in a storage closet.
somehow
And I believe others of them were
Teflon
in
Biden.
file cabinet drawers.
So what's your
I would refer
assessment?
you to the report.
What's your assessment on security and access control measures at the Penn Biden Center?
That was something that we looked at. There were some security access controls at the Penn Biden Center, but we did get a handle on people who had access to the office space during the time period when we believe the materials were there. And there were other people, including students and some foreign dignitaries, that visited that facility at the time.
Very good. You anticipated my next question. So when the boxes were discovered to have classified documents more than 5 years later, who discovered these boxes? It was Patrick Moore. Is that correct?
Correct. One of the president's personal counsel.
And did Mr. Moore have some type of active security clearance at the time?
No.
How about the executive assistant at the Penn Biden Center?
No.
On page 265 of your
Actually,
report.
I'm sorry, Congressman, I may have misspoken there. I'm not certain whether or not that executive assistant had an active security clearance at the time.
Very good. On page 265 of your report, you stated, when interviewed by FBI agents, Moore believed the small closet was initially locked and that the Penn Biden Center staff member provided a key to unlock it, but his memory was fuzzy on that point. But an interview with Mr. Biden's executive assistant seemed to contradict his statement. Do you remember this exchange, and did in fact it contradict each other?
Sir, you're asking if I remember the exchange with Mr. Moore during our interview with him?
Right. Do you remember them contradicting each other?
Her is very likable.
I don't remember
Very
that
professional.
contradiction specifically, but generally during the interview, sometimes we heard things from some witnesses that were in tension with what we heard from other witnesses, and we did our best to resolve those conflicts.
Just very quickly, in total, National Archives discovered 9 documents totaling 44 pages with classification markings. Is that correct?
From the Penn Biden Center, yes.
And you declined charges because, in summarizing your analysis, you couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that retention of the documents was willful.
Correct, sir.
Very good. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Pennsylvania recognized.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Herr, for your testimony today. With all the posturing that we've heard thus far this morning, I think it's important that we refocus and remember the conclusion that you reached on the first page and in the very first sentence of your report, which was, we conclude that no criminal charges are warranted in this matter. Did I read that accurately?
You did, Congresswoman.
Okay. Your report also says, in addition to this shortage of evidence, there are other innocent explanations for the documents we have not been able to refute. Did I read that correctly?
Congresswoman, if you would give me a page citation, I could...
Page 6.
6.
Hey, if you haven't already subscribed, new channel.
Yes,
long
I see that language on page
history,
6.
Okay,
fun
thank you.
shorts,
Now, in addition to those conclusions, your report
educational
details
stuff.
several material distinctions, as you call them, between
waste time
President
in
Biden's
there or
actions and
something?
former President Trump's mishandling of classified materials. The facts are that President Biden cooperated with your investigation. Is that correct?
He did.
And his team notified authorities when they discovered classified documents, and he turned them over immediately. Is that correct?
Yes.
He consented to multiple searches of his home and other properties. Is that correct?
Correct.
And he voluntarily sat for an interview with you. Is that correct?
Correct.
But when it comes to Mr. Trump's treatment of classified materials, your report states that, according to the criminal indictment against him, he refused to return classified documents in his possession for many months, despite having multiple chances to do so, and he obstructed justice by
Speaking a
enlisting
little
others to
faster,
destroy
'cause I have
evidence
on
and lie about it.
1.5.
Is that
It's a
correct?
4-hour,
Now, you note in your testimony
4-hour
that the specific
testimony
comments you made
that's
about
given here.
President Biden's memory have gotten a lot of
And hey,
attention.
if you haven't already,
And as we've
there
seen
is a,
today,
let's
our
see.
Republican colleagues are
There
again and
is a
again trying to
like button in
weaponize
the
those
corner
comments in a
here.
cheap attempt to
I don't
score
know if
political
that's
points.
the right
But
corner.
as someone who's participated
It's
in
the wrong
trials, you
corner.
know that witnesses,
There's a
regardless
like
of age,
button.
often have
You gotta
difficulty
click on
recalling
the three
specific
buttons
statements
in
or
the
facts when
corner,
asked about them many
and then,
years after those facts. So let's take a
right
quick
up
look at a
there.
differing witness experiencing a
then you
lapse in
gotta
memory
like
during a
the video.
deposition.
Subscribing.
Your
is
next
easy.
wife was a woman by the name of Marla
Hit that
Maples.
subscribe button.
And
New channel,
sitting here today, do you
more
recall
education
what years you were
stuff.
married to Ms. Maples?
Champ,
I'd have to
we
get the
all-
exact dates for you. I can do that.
Am I correct that you married your current wife in January
I
2005?
don't know relative to that date.
And what years were you the owner of the Plaza Hotel?
I don't know the use.
James Webb.
I don't remember the names. Don't remember the name.
So you don't remember saying you have one of the best memories?
I don't remember that. I remember you telling me, but I don't know that I said.
So I would
Remembering
also add that
some
Mr. Trump told
schmuck
lawyers, I
that
don't
you met
remember,
years
35
ago
times in
is
his
not
deposition for a lawsuit over
tantamount
Trump
to
University.
liking-
And in response to
there's-
questions from
there's
special
not
counsel Robert
tantamount
Mueller,
to
he answered,
remembering when your
did not
son
remember
died
or
when
could
you
not recall
served
27
as
times.
vice
Now,
president. I think that
Mr.
should
Hur,
be
you've said
said.
today that DOJ process and regulations required you to assess whether a jury would find Mr. Biden to be a credible witness, correct?
I'm not sure that I said those words exactly, but of course, in my view, how a jury would perceive Mr. Biden if he elected to testify in his own defense at a trial, that would be part of the whole ball of wax
Yes,
that jurors
this
would
is
consider
America.
determining
You
whether
can
he had
sue
willful
anybody
intent
in the jury,
in retaining or
especially
disclosing national defense information.
Sure. Do you have any reason to believe that the special counsel who
Anything.
investigated and charged Mr.
There's
Trump
always a
with
way.
willful retention of classified documents
Where did you get
would have
the
failed to
hamster?
make an assessment of whether the jury would find Mr. Trump to be a credible witness?
I don't have any information relating
You
to
can't bring a.
how, I'm not qualified basically to answer that question as to what went into Mr.
There's
Smith's
usually
decision.
someone to bring.
But
an
you are
actual
qualified to say
yes.
what are the normal procedures
Usually.
followed by a special counsel, correct?
I'm familiar with the rules as set forth in the Justice Manual and my understanding of how to apply them.
And in fact, what you did.
But then there's
Okay,
even some.
so
math
I would
you
suggest
gotta
that
do.
we
Does
can
it
all
make
assume
sense
that the
to
fact that
sue?
Mr. Trump was charged with multiple counts of willfully concealing classified documents suggests that the special counsel in that case determined that
Should I
Mr.
move
Trump's
this
denials are not credible.
bit?
At this point, I would ask unanimous
Shoe off
consent
center.
to enter into the record an excerpt from the committee's transcribed interview with Stephen D'Antonio, former assistant director in charge of the
Stanley. I
FBI
don't
Washington
know
Field
everybody's
Office on July 7th,
part of it. I'm not some
2023,
sort of
in which he
guru who's
explained the urgency
memorized
for the FBI to
400
retrieve and
people's
secure classified documents from Donald Trump's estate because they contained national security
psychopath.
information that
Just
should not
kidding.
be viewed by anyone without the proper security clearance.
But you
Even
can
Mr.
kinda tell
D'Antonio
by the
himself could not view
tone
the
of the
documents,
person, kinda
given
where
their
they're
high
coming
security
from.
clearance, despite being the assistant director in charge of
let's
the
find
FBI
out
Washington
together.
Field Office.
Miss
Thank you.
Without
I'll yield
objection,
back.
the only yield back. Gentleman from Oregon's recognized for 5 minutes.
U.S.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
representative.
I'm quite interested in the dates that are set forth in your report, Mr. Hur. And the reason I'm interested is because
born in
I'm
Syracuse,
getting
sorry.
confused between the
She,
2017
her
date and the
represents, Pennsylvania.
2024 date as to the condition of the president's memory. And so, was there a difference? Because when I look at it, it seems like his memory was bad in
And
2017,
Mr. Bentz,
and
this
then it was
guy, Bentz.
bad today. But there's never any distinction made. But isn't it true that if you were going to be looking at at prosecuting as you were, you would look carefully at his condition in 2017? Isn't that the proper time? Because I think you say in your report that your best case, I think you call it out, the best case for charges would rely on Mr. Biden's possession of Afghanistan documents in his Virginia home in February 2017 when he was a private citizen and when he told his ghostwriter he just found classified material. That's the best case as you say it.
Yes.
And then you work your way through a series of defenses against your best case. So you were looking at his condition in 2017. Do I have that right?
You do, Congressman.
And his memory was bad then. We can draw conclusions whether it improved over the next 6 years or not. But I just want to make sure it's clear that we're looking at his condition in 2017, which you then find as you go through the list of defenses, that is his memory is bad, his memory is bad, his memory is bad. There's about 6 or 7 defenses here. And so what it gets me to is this question. And I actually pulled this quote out of something I read this morning, that perhaps your report concluded, and perhaps it did not, that the president is, quote, incapable of being held accountable. But that's not quite what happened, is it? You didn't find that he was incapable of being held accountable, did you?
I did not. Those words did not appear in my report.
They do not. But you reached a conclusion that you didn't have the evidence, but then your report continually recites these defenses. And I'm having a hard time putting the two together. If you didn't have the evidence, why do you persist in reciting these defenses?
Congressman, I wrote my report as an explanation of my decision to decline charges as to President Biden. And the way that I came up with that explanation and wrote it in my report for the Attorney General is the following. The approach that I took was a prosecutor envisioning what would be the probable outcome of trial if we charged this case, if we presented the evidence to a jury, and not only the government presenting the evidence to a jury, but what would happen if the defense lawyers also got a chance to try to poke holes in the government's case at trial. And with respect to one of the several potential defenses that I lay out in the report, one of them does focus on the president's memory-related issues. That is a defense that the president's defense lawyers may well present at trial. And a jury is going to be confronted with at least 3 separate sets of evidence relating to the president's memory. One is from the recordings in 2016 and 2017, the ghostwriter.
Forgive me for interrupting, but I'm limited on time as everybody else was. But you say, I think, that the evidence suggests he is incapable of forming, or you're incapable of proving, intent. There's kind of a bit of a difference there, right? You may well have had the intent, but you could not of holding these documents, and I hate to say hiding the documents, but you couldn't prove it. So what you did instead is fell back to the various defenses that might also be asserted against you. Kind of a heap of rationale for not pursuing the president. Is that do I have it right now?
Congressman, I think we're on the same page. I think what I'm trying to convey is that the way that prosecutors assess the strengths and weaknesses of their case is to think through, hey, in the government's case in chief, here's the evidence we're going to present, and the jury might be with us.
Maybe
but that's not the end of the trial. The trial also has to include presentation from the defense lawyers.
You're correct, and I'm a lawyer, I've tried cases, so I get it. Your report is not an exoneration so much as a determination that the evidence as you saw it would not overcome the defenses that you had identified, plus whatever lack of evidence you perceived. So it's not an exoneration, is it?
The word exoneration does not appear anywhere in my report, and that is not my conclusion.
The other thing that's of interest, and I think you were misquoted, you said something about, or someone, I think it was Mr. Raskin, suggested that you, well, I'm going to run out of time, but I appreciate the work you do as a prosecutor, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Herb, we've been at this close to 3 hours. We will, if you can hang with us, we'd like to keep going. There's a
in the way that people like
chance.
Schiff have
We
come
could
at
complete
him,
votes by the time we have to go to votes on the House floor, which would be about 1:40.
Nadler.
I can keep going, Chairman.
Okay, then we'll try to do that. And there's a chance we may not too, but I just wanted you to know the lay of the land. Now yield to the gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hurd, for your testimony and for your service as a prosecutor at the Department of Justice. I want to focus a bit more on the progress of the investigation and kind of some process questions. So you were appointed by Attorney General Garland as special counsel to investigate the president's handling of classified documents in January of 2023, correct?
Correct.
And Attorney General Garland, of course, as you know, was nominated by President Biden to serve in his role.
Correct.
During your 15-month investigation, did the Attorney General attempt to interfere with your investigation?
No.
Did he impede your investigation in any way?
No.
Did any other member of the Department of Justice or within the administration refuse to cooperate with your investigation?
No.
Were you ever denied access to materials, witnesses, resources from Attorney General Garland that you might have needed during the investigation?
No.
You submitted, I think this is right, your final report to Attorney General Garland on February 5th of 2024.
Correct.
Right, okay. And it was then released publicly 3 days later, on February 8th of 2024. Is that right?
I believe that's true, yes.
In the final report that was released, were any of your substantive findings redacted or changed in any way?
No.
None of your findings were modified by the Attorney General?
No.
Did the Attorney General issue any kind of statement or a letter attempting to describe the contents of your report?
No.
Okay. You're familiar, I know, I'm sure, with the investigation that was conducted by Special Counsel Mueller years ago with respect to the former president.
Yes.
And at that time, Attorney General Barr was in charge of the Justice Department. He sat where you sat in this committee. I remember it well, just a few short years ago, testifying on the nature of that particular investigation. Are you familiar with the way in which he released that report and characterized it?
Yes.
Okay. Very different from the way that Attorney General Garland conducted this particular release. I take it you'd agree with that.
They were not the same
You can
approach.
just
Not the
tell
same approach.
by the
Right?
tone
In
of
the case of
each
Attorney General
person
Garland,
that's,
no
who's
impeding
got
or
their
interfering
few
with your
minutes to
investigation in
speak,
any way
if they're
whatsoever,
Republican or Democrat.
releasing the
This guy is
report in
Democrat.
full to the American
I've
public,
been looking,
not attempting to
you know, but
mischaracterize
you can
it,
tell.
or describe it
So
in
let's,
any way.
let's play a game. Next person
Dissimilar
to speak.
from
Let's-
Attorney General
we
Barr,
don't know
who
them
5 years
for-
ago, as you recall,
Let's see
after
who
Special
he
Counsel
is.
Mueller submitted his report to the Department of Justice, took nearly a month to release the report to the American public, heavily redacted, and not before he had issued a letter of his own to the leaders of the Senate and House Judiciary Committees, mischaracterizing the contents of that report. That distinction and difference is very important because from your testimony, at least from what I gleaned from your testimony, is that Attorney General Garland acted appropriately and ethically with respect to this investigation. I take it you agree.
Attorney General Garland did not interfere with my efforts, and I was able to conduct a fair, thorough, and independent investigation.
Very different approach, as you said, from the way in which the Department of Justice, unfortunately, tragically, functioned under the former president. I'm going to yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 5
can't
minutes.
help
The gentleman yield for 10
themselves.
seconds. Gentleman from,
Yes, sir.
yeah, I would just point out
Can't
to the
help
gentleman from Colorado's last point, there was one big difference. Bill Barr didn't name Bob Mueller as a special counsel. Bob Mueller was named by Rod Rosenstein. That's a huge difference in how this whole thing works. I now yield back to the gentleman from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hur, in your report, you cited principles of federal prosecution and observed that, and I quote, historically, after leaving office, many former presidents and vice presidents have knowingly taken home sensitive materials related to national security for their administrations without being
Mr.
charged with
Moore,
crimes.
Republican or
And
Democrat?
this historical record is an
No
important
chat.
context for judging whether or why to charge a former vice president and our former president, unquote. Why is examining this history so important?
Congressman, one of the reasons that it was important was because it would bear on how a jury would perceive, how a jury would decide whether or not criminal willful intent was formed by the person retaining or disclosing the national defense information at issue.
Has there been an exception to this in the history of the nation? Have we charged any former presidents?
As I state in the report, to my knowledge, there is only one exception, and that is former President Trump.
Given the history, is it fair to say it's preferable not to charge a former president or vice president for allegedly mishandling classified documents, in your opinion?
Republican to me. Let's
Congressman,
find
I
out.
can't articulate a preference, whether it's preferable. All I can talk about is the work that I did, the facts that I found, and the decision that I reached in my case.
Mr. Hur, what's the difference in a U.S. senator having documents and a former president of the United States?
For purposes of proving willfulness, I believe that there would be a number of differences in terms of the types of access and the ease with which presidents, while in office, can access classified information as compared to the access privileges that senators have.
Can presidents declassify documents that they have in their possession?
I believe under certain circumstances, yes.
Former presidents as well?
Congressman, I confess I'm not, this is not an area of the law that I've looked into or explained in my report, and I'm here to talk about the work that is reflected in the report.
Well, let me say this, sir. You have a reputation beyond reproach, and I just want you to know that. I think that President Biden ought to be thankful that the Attorney General appointed you to investigate his case. But you have a special counsel colleague by the name of Jack Smith who cannot lay claim to such a reputation. Isn't that right?
Boo.
I have no opinion. I don't have anything to say about
In
it.
fact, Jack Smith, whom Biden Justice Attorney General Garland appointed to investigate President Trump, has a reputation, according to deep-rooted reporting from the Washington Times, as an overzealous prosecutor who relies ethically or on ethically dubious tactics, unquote. And his prosecutorial record is replete with a quote, let me say this, string of mistrials and overturned convictions. Actually, Chief Justice Roberts once rebuked Mr. Smith's prosecutorial theory as a boundless interpretation of the federal bribery statute. That did not comport with the text of the statute or the precedent of this court, according to the Supreme Court Justice. And so, you know, my question is, do you think in the case of Jack Smith, do you think justice is blind when he's looking at President Trump? Since we've never done this in the history of the country, is justice truly blind?
Sir, I'm not here to express any opinions with respect to a pending case against another defendant. I'm here to talk about the work that I did with respect to the investigation relating to President Biden.
Mr. Chairman, I'll yield the balance of my time back to you.
All right, well, we know by that he's definitely a Republican. Confirm. Change.
You, to this conclusion.
It's not as apparent. If you
Congressman
just
Jordan,
Google it.
I'm sorry,
Page
the mic was
1.
turned on
Yeah.
partway through
Can
your
you explain what specifically in your interview with President Biden led you to this conclusion?
the conclusion
That
about
broad
how we-
statement that's been cited many
I wonder
times.
if that's intentionally being omitted here.
the totality
Definitely
of
Republican.
the time that I spent with the president during his voluntary interview was something that I certainly considered in framing my assessment and articulating it in the report. And that includes not only the words in the cold record of the transcript of the interview, but also the experience of being there in the room with him and
sure my friend,
frankly
let me know
considering
if
how
you
he
hear
would
it.
present to a jury in a criminal trial if charges were brought.
So I guess I'm asking specifically. I know you cite in the report the dates that he couldn't remember when he was vice president, when he began, when his term ended. You cite that in the report. Is there anything else specifically that stands out from that interview with the president?
A number of things stand out. And again, I'm aware that the transcript has now been made available. I do provide certain examples in my report of significant, personally painful experiences about which the president was unable to recall certain information. I also took
got
into
no
account the
viewers.
president's
Come
overall
on,
demeanor
viewers.
in interacting with me during the 5+ hour
What's
voluntary
up?
interview.
I don't
it was
believe it.
a wealth of details about being there in the moment with the president,
Except
including
talking
his inability to
over
recall certain things.
her
And I'll also
and
say,
all
as
the
reflected in the
Congress
transcript, the fact that he
My
was prompted
script,
on
not
numerous
theirs.
occasions by the members of the White House
I
counsel's
read that.
office.
What the brief look I had at the transcript this morning, because we just got it this morning. I
This
saw
has
something
been
that. Sure, now recognize the gentlelady
this has
from
actually been a
Texas.
great success for a stream.
Pennsylvania. I'm used to
I don't
TV down
even
there.
know
I
if I got any
got an upgrade.
subscribers. Got 2 likes. Hey.
Thank you,
Not
Mr. Hur.
bad.
Thank you, Chairman.
But I
Thank you,
figured
Mr.
out
Hur,
how
for
to
your service
stream
to our
vertically.
country, for your
And
team's
that,
service in this
my
investigation.
friends,
You determined, after what
is
you
the
described
real
as
success
rigorous,
here.
detailed, and thorough analysis, that President Biden should not be prosecuted for mishandling classified documents. In fact, everybody can take a look at your report. The very first sentence says as much. It says, quote, "We conclude that no criminal charges are warranted in this matter." Am I correct?
Yes,
That's the bottom line of this report. Am I correct?
that is the first sentence.
It's the first sentence and the bottom line. There's an awful lot of misinformation that has been put forward by the press in some cases and also by the other side of this dais. You didn't reach this decision because President Biden was sympathetic. Is that correct?
I reached the decision based on the totality of the reasons that I set forth at length in my report.
Based on the evidence. And while Mr. Trump, who is being prosecuted, is not sympathetic, you didn't calibrate any of that in there. Sympathetic, not sympathetic. Doesn't matter. It's the evidence, right?
Congresswoman, I did not reach any assessments of the evidence in the Trump matter. To the extent that I considered the allegations against former President Trump, it was for purposes of comparing
I
relevant
trust
precedents.
that with your credibility, you were not out to get Mr. Trump nor here to help Mr. Biden. I think it's about the evidence, and I think you say that over and over again in your report. Why did you decide President Biden should not be prosecuted? Your report tells us, quote, "We conclude the evidence is not sufficient to convict." Those are your words. Is that correct?
I believe if those exact words do not appear in the report, that is consistent with the gist of my conclusion.
Very good. They are your exact words. That was not the case with Donald Trump. You have a copy of your report today, don't you, in front of you?
I do.
Would you read a portion of it for me? Your words, it is page 11, starting on line 3, beginning with the words, "Unlike the evidence involving Mr. Biden." Would you read the next few sentences?
Unlike the evidence involving Mr. Biden, the allegations set forth in the indictment of Mr. Trump, if proven, would present serious aggravating facts.
Keep going.
Congresswoman, I'm happy to have you read the words in my report.
Well, it's your report, so I think it actually is more fitting that you read those.
Most notably, after being given multiple chances to return classified documents and avoid prosecution, Mr. Trump allegedly did the opposite.
Keep going.
According to the indictment, he not only refused to return the documents for many months, but he also obstructed justice by enlisting others to destroy evidence and then to lie about it.
You may stop there. Thank you. You mentioned the indictment
stop
against
there.
Mr. Trump for mishandling sensitive classified
Let me
national
know,
security
Chad.
information.
I
That
know
indictment
there's
says
just
at the end of his
few viewers
presidency,
right now.
Mr.
We've
Trump,
had a few,
looking for
you
my
know,
indictment here.
They've
I
come
have
and
it here,
gone.
filling them.
But you know, what do you think?
Mr. Trump himself ordered that boxes containing classified materials go to Mar-a-Lago, where he hosted tens of thousands of guests. Then he kept these sensitive materials carelessly about the property, as you can see here. Classified documents ended up in a bathroom, a ballroom, on a floor, spewing about. And when a grand jury subpoenaed the documents, what did Donald Trump do? The indictment again shows against him what he responded by, suggesting that his attorney falsely represent that the FBI and grand jury that he did not have documents called for by the subpoena. He directed his employee, Waltine Nauta, to move boxes of the documents to conceal them from Mr. Trump's attorney, and then lied to his attorney, and the FBI and the grand jury, suggesting his attorney might hide or destroy documents called for by the grand jury investigation. Mr. Hur, are those the type of aggravating facts to which you refer to in your report?
Come on in.
Congresswoman, the
ask questions.
aggravating facts that I refer
We'll
to
get
in
the
the
bottom
report
of it together.
are set forth and
Remember,
described in my report.
knowledge is power.
Very good.
Subscribe for
Mr.
more.
Hur, to the best of your knowledge and investigation, did President Biden ever direct an employee to lie about, hide, or destroy classified information